Damn. So like I was out all day and it looks like quite a lot of stuff happened, huh? Man, God bless Bushiroad for giving us content creators not one banlist video to make, not two banlist videos to make, but at least three banlist videos to make this week. We're truly eating well today or this week in terms of free content. What's up everyone? Welcome, welcome. I'm sure I'm like the last person you're hearing this from, but we have an English specific restriction list for V Premium today. So if you've lived under a rock, this week we got a Japanese restriction list update, which of course happens every 3 months. And initially they told us that there was going to be an English update as well. And to be honest, I was part of the people that thought, come on, it's just going to be the translated version of the Japanese one, right? Like, what could there possibly be else that they add? As much as we're all hoping for more restrictions, I was like, come on, they're not going to split things off right now, are they? But lo and behold, they did, and the community reaction has been pretty cool, which I do want to talk about that as well. So I haven't really done a banlist discussion video yet, because I was kind of waiting for this to see if the English one would be different from the JP one, and you know, lo and behold, it is. So I think today we're going to sit down and kind of talk about the restrictions. I've got my, handy dandy, literally just have the restrictions here on my tablet. So let's talk about it, right? First things first, I already talked about standard before in my predictions that it won't get any hits, and no surprise, like the meta is super diverse, it's very nice. There are some decks that are slightly maybe like flying up above, but I don't think they're gonna really get any like crazy support, mainly talking about Magnolia here. And other decks just have glaring weaknesses like Seraph Snow, despite looking really, really strong. So I think overall standard is well balanced. I didn't expect any hits here either. And I think anyone that actively plays the format knows that the format is quite diverse and a lot of decks are very much at the top of the meta as well. For premium, while especially now that we have a more English catered restriction list, I was expecting to maybe see Nightmare Dolls, but I'm also glad that we didn't see anything when Japan didn't have anything. The reason why I say this is because I think what happened here today could have easily happened with premium last year, and that would have sucked in my opinion. Like, imagine if only English got the huge premium ban list and Japan would have just been let free, just keep playing your format, keep playing with like Zaza Net 1 and like all this other stuff, like just as it be, just because they don't as actively scream about the things that are problematic in the format, right? That being said, when it came to V Premium this time around, a lot of the top players in Japan were asking for hits, and they specifically were asking Percival, Hamiel, as well as Melody to be touched. So on that front, things definitely got addressed. But I'm really kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of glad that Premium stays the same, at least between the two countries, between the two kind of like languages. I shouldn't say countries, English. The English format encompasses majority of the world. But I'm kind of glad that we didn't have this like, the difference in restriction for Premium. And I kind of hope that this additional restriction that we have in English will come over to the Japanese side maybe in June, because I do personally want to continue seeing matching restriction lists, especially for V Premium, where the majority of the card pool is the same between the two languages, just that Japan has more promos than us, but the promos don't necessarily determine the meta decks, at least for now. But let's talk about the actual restrictions to V Premium. So let's start off with the ones, the ones from the Japanese side. So I already talked about most of these as well. Hamiel being banned, I said before, if it's at 1, it's still abusable, so you can't really like resolve that. And honestly, for Angels, like as much as I'm also hurt by not having my 4 SP Hamiels being playable anymore in V Premium are still okay. Angels has plenty of guard restrict, whether you're playing the Feather Palace or the grade 1 that sets up a Sentinel restrict, you still have plenty of Sentinel restrict. You still have the ability to ask for no PGs, but they won't be paired with a rescue check, and they won't be paired with a free 15k and crit buff. So you're gonna have to work for that a little bit, right? You're gonna have to work for it a little bit, but this also means that Gabriel's game plan is going to change a lot, because now it's no longer so much about like, oh, get yourself to 3 so you can use Hamiel. It's going to become about different things, and I'm personally quite excited to explore the deck as well without Hamiel. I think Gabriel will become quite exciting, and I think part of this, like these restriction lists, is also trying to reimagine how these decks will change and what they will become, and I think Gabriel will still be really strong even after losing Hamiel, because we still have PG restrict, and we can dedicate that space now to other cards and other strategies as well, and also just let Celestials actually have some time in the spotlight for once, which is also pretty good. Next, Meep. So Meep being set to 1, I think is perfectly fine. I think that this is the kind of consistency enabler for Melody, and especially one of the big boosts that the deck got together with the last Bermuda set. I think this is the hit that people wanted to see in Japan in particular, because of course Melody is quite problematic in terms of its high roll, and I think that this definitely decreases that high roll quite a bit. The deck will still definitely be alive. The deck can still do some pretty unfair things even without Meep. It just won't be as consistent, which is a good. The point of restriction list isn't to kill off decks, it's to make decks not be as good, but to still exist. But then that's why this next one honestly doesn't make as much sense to me. Or, you know, I mean, let me rephrase that. It does make sense to me, but the collateral hurts a lot. So Percival went from being choice restricted with Gurgwit to being restricted to 1 period in V Premium, which means that yes, in decks like Duke and in decks like, you know, any Gold Paladin variant, it's nice that Percival's at 1, which means it's like a sacky one of, you know, where you get 1 extra Axle Circle rather than being able to abuse it every single turn. But the collateral here is that the very recently printed Bluish Flames, the Prominence core that, you know, myself included, a lot of people built golds for the first time in V Premium because of it, got shot. Like, that deck literally barely functions, and that's why I personally was hoping for a name restrict, right? So that they would make Percival be that you can only use him if all of your grade 3s in your deck, like all grade 3 normal units in your deck, are Bluish Flames. So that way you can kind of restrict it, but you know, that's not going to be possible anymore. Or at least, like, you know, further choice restrict Percival with Duke or something like that. But they chose to just say, nope, put to 1 and make Gurgwit, you know, be able to use it at 1 again. So, you know, there's also the argument that, like, oh, Percival will always be a problem card, it needs to go to 1 or be banned. So I kind of get it, you know, from that standpoint I do get it, but it just kind of sucks for the people that were just playing this obviously tier 2 deck, and, you know, now it just kind of got shot in the legs. And so those were the JP restrictions, right? Those were the Japanese restrictions that obviously were kind of like the main ones we were talking about on Tuesday, but then everyone looked at it and were like, well, okay, so now, like, Prism and Luard will just run amok. And, you know, that kind of whole thing of the actual problem decks in the Western scene not being checked was quite a strong emotion for a lot of us, because we looked at the pie charts from the topping decks at BRO, which is like our biggest competitive event since the pandemic started, and, you know, everyone saw that the main majority of tops were Luard and Prism. They took up over half of all of the tops. So obviously people were like, okay, well then this is going to be literally the same meta for BSF, like for Springfest, for Team League, it's going to be the exact same thing. But luckily today there was a page 2. There were memes on day 1. It's like, okay, so where's page 2 of the restriction list? And lo and behold, the page 2 existed this whole time. Wow, crazy. So this one is a pretty pleasant sight for me, and obviously the Bermuda one, I know after I posted my predictions video, quite a few people got upset at my like choice 3 prediction for Bermuda, because I do know it was a lot more like generically based and like turning off other, you know, Bermuda decks, which I apologize, wasn't my intent. I was just kind of thinking how to kind of try to nerf Prism in some sense without actually hitting the engine. But looks like Bushiroad chose to not only hit the engine, but also limit Ellie as well as Kutire, which is of course the kind of Highlander searcher that a lot of Prism lists have been using. So the choice restriction is that you can choose 1 of 3 cards and run it in your deck, so you cannot run any other combination of these. So you either run Kutire and no Rosas and no Ellies, or you run Rosa and no Kutires and no Ellies, or Ellie and you can't run the other 2. So this means that decks like Anj can still run Ellie at 4, no problem, and they don't run the other 2 cards. Prisms have to unfortunately say goodbye to Ellie as well as Kutire, so the deck will still be definitely alive and well. The deck will still be alive and well, and I think it will definitely be relevant for Springfest. So if you own a Prism deck and you were practicing for Springfest, I think you can easily still play it. Like, yes, you lost a Searcher, and yes, you lost your strong 20k shield that you can recycle, but you haven't lost Lieselot, you haven't lost like the new grade 2 that came out recently, you haven't lost like Aqua. There's so many good cards you still have access to that obviously you can still use, and Prisms will still be amazing. So I think the Bermuda hit was rather soft. I don't think it was actually as hard as it could have been. You know, they didn't just like choice it with freaking like, you know, like choice Rosa and Ver or something. That would be a bit too much. So I think it's gonna have an impact, but it's not gonna have as much of an impact as people expect. Like, Prisms aren't gonna die out. I'm 100% sure of that. Like, it's just, it still has majority of its pieces. Now for Shadows, so Shadows got another restriction for the first time in 2 years between, of course, Nemain, Karen, and Luard. So before it was just Nemain and Luard, you couldn't run both in the same deck. Now you cannot have Karen in addition. So if you're running Luard, you can have Karen and Nemain, but what sucks is that if you're playing Claret Sword, if you have Nemain, you can't run Karen anymore, which kind of hurts. I think that's a little bit of a pain. I think it would have been okay not to do like a choice 3, but to just say Luard and Karen can be used in the same deck. I think that would have been a-okay. But they chose to go on a heavier route, and I think it's fine personally. Like, Luard losing Karen, I've said this before, like that makes them less greedy. They can abuse Leofall. They have a set, like, they can abuse their Owl counterblast that they like to use. Like, they have to be careful with how much they commit to their Morfessas as well. Like, it will make Luard players a lot more careful, and I've already seen a lot of Luard players kind of talk about, like, the different cards they want to run, whether it's like Blue Espada or like things like that they want to try out, or other forms of countercharge like Curse Lancer. So I think this is a good hit. This definitely does impact Luard quite a lot. Again, not enough to kill it. I think Luard is still too good of a deck to be killed, but losing this kind of countercharge, and of course being forced to run like Curse Lancer for countercharge, which isn't a grade 1, is also very big because that throws off the consistency of the deck. So we might see the whole deck kind of reinvented, and so those are the kind of like the main restrictions, which of course were quite spicy. But for me, there was other two things I wanted to talk about this restriction list, which, like, first things first, before we get to that, is I do think it's a good restriction list. I think now with the English one, we have a very impactful hit to the V Premium meta, and it will switch things up, and it allows for the Client Collection decks to have some breathing room to an extent. Keep in mind that this does unlock the layer 2, right? So Night Rose is gonna be popping, Alter Ego like Messiahs, Chrono Jet finally can see the light of day again, which for me is very hype. There's a lot of these, like the old tier ones, like the Cross is happy to be here all of a sudden, Vanquisher is ready to pop off. Like, all these decks that were getting like rogue tops in the BRO format will probably become the next mainstream, together with the decks that, you know, like Prism, that didn't get hit too hard. So while yes, I'm excited for Jewel Knights to finally have a chance to shine, I don't necessarily think they're gonna have that great of a chance to shine if Vanquisher is running around everywhere too. So while yes, it is a great restriction list, I think it's a nice way to kind of like take things step by step. You know, unlike the premium list last year where it like literally reset the whole format, this one's going to be taking things like in blocks. You know, chop off one block, see how things are for 3 months throughout the Springfest season, chop off another block if necessary. If not, if it's diverse enough, leave it be, right? What I do wonder though is, will Japan adapt this, right? Because now obviously Japan at first were like, okay, thank God you hit the cards we want, and now if you look at the original tweet where they show the restriction list, you will see a lot of quote retweets of Japanese players, and they're like, huh, these decks were problem decks. They were even more strict on the English meta. Why is that? Should we be like experimenting with these decks? Should we be playing more Luard? Should we be playing Prisms? You know, should we be playing Highlander? Like, clearly there's a reason why these cards were hit in English, and the Japanese players realize that too. And so now we might be seeing these decks get abused in Japan, so they're probably gonna get hit as well in Japanese in like 3 months. So we might just end up being in the same restriction list over time. But I guess maybe this is Bushiroad's way of saying like, okay, here is how things are in English, and if you want to see why these decks and these cards are problems, feel free to explore. And of course, I invite our Japanese friends to explore V Premium with us and, you know, try to rediscover the meta. But of course, for them, it's going to be different now. Like, they can play Luard with Karen, and they can play, you know, Prism's full power. So we're not really playing the same format anymore, which kind of, I'm very happy that the Japanese side got really interested in our restriction list and are kind of asking to see like, okay, like, well, can we get this in like 3 months time too? Can we also like, you know, can we like, if we abuse these decks now, will we get an emergency restriction list? So I really like that the Japanese side got very interested in what goes on in our side of like the V Premium meta. But this is where things got a little bit problematic for me, is that you know, my dream is for Worlds to truly mean Worlds, and that means that next time we have the World Championship, it includes Japan. For the newer players, you might not know this, but Japan hasn't been part of the World Championship since like 2013. Yeah, like literally like January 2014 rather. It's like literally they've been in a separate world, aka WGP, where it's just Japan plus Southeast Asia for the, like, you know, parts of Asia like China. Just in general, it's like Japan plus Asia equals world, and then everything else also equals world, but the two worlds never meet. And what I really want is for the World Championship to really truly be a World Championship. And you know, this isn't the first time that we've had a split ban list, right? Because for those of you that have been around since the G era, you'll know that until the V series started, we've always had different ban lists. Commander Laurel was not restricted in English the way it was in Japanese. Lisbeth was hit much later in English than she was in Japanese. Hits like to the Soul Blast 2 draw card, you know, the Kagero card in Overlord meta, like in the cross meta, I don't think that hit ever came through in the English side. I think that was only in Japanese for a brief while. Descendant never got hit in English, it got hit in Japanese for quite a while. So we have had different restriction lists for quite a while during the G era and before that, but that was also back when the release gap between sets was much bigger. Whereas now we have like, what, a month 2 months due to delays at times. So the metas are much more similar and the card pools are pretty similar as long as we get the promos on time and not too expensively. So it does make me wonder, like, why are we splitting up the formats again, right? I do prefer when all the, you know, both of the 2 main languages for the game, Japanese and English, stay in the same restriction list and play the same format. And I did enjoy the kind of Japanese reactions to the premium ban list last year because it was mostly confusion, but then they learned by looking at what goes on in the West. So I really hope that, like, for this Springfest season where there's no chance of Japan and the West meeting, it's fine to have different restriction lists because our events are not going to overlap, but I really hope that by the time we have Worlds again, we can have matching restriction lists and we can have Worlds that truly mean Worlds. Otherwise, we're gonna have a mess and it's gonna be Yu-Gi-Oh! With their Worlds ban list all over again, and I don't think anybody wants that. Anyway, guys, this has been it for my restriction list discussion for today. I'm sure I've raised points that other YouTubers already raised. I literally got home and recorded this. I haven't had time to watch other people's videos yet, which I'm sure, you know, all the other content creators have made lovely discussions about the English restriction list, and I want you guys to check them out as well because I'm sure there's a lot of really cool things being raised. I'm gonna do that after recording this too. But let me know your thoughts in the comments as well. What do you think of the restriction list? Was it too heavy? Was it okay? I actually held a couple of community polls with you guys to see your opinions of it on a first impressions basis. And so here's a little table of you guys that responded to the YouTube channel community page. So you can see here that over like exactly 50% of you guys said it's very good or amazing. So very good or above. So that's pretty immense from over 1,000 votes in like literally like what, 3-4 hours. 26% said it's good, and then basically like 23% said it's meh or worse. So of course some people aren't that happy about it, especially for those of us that played Bluish, like God rest in peace. But a lot of people were a lot more satisfied than on Tuesday, where people I think were definitely not too happy with it. I also did a poll on Twitter where unfortunately Twitter only gives you 4 like choices for answers, so I couldn't do the 5. And you can see here that again we have over 60% that said very good or above, 32% that said it's decent, and only 6% of 700 plus votes that said it was bad. So even here too, a lot of people are quite satisfied with this restriction list, so I think it is a good thing and a good little kind of metric for Bushiroad to have on what people feel about this restriction list. So yeah, good job Bushiroad, good job Bushi staff, thank you Bushi Matt for all your hard work and listening to, you know, like not just like the tournament data, but also how people feel about the V Premium format, because I think for a lot of people they were really bored of the format that we've had for the last 2 years, and it's nice to finally have something refreshing going into Springfest in like what, 3 weeks. Anyway guys, that's gonna be it for me today. If you liked the video, give it a like. Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below as well, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. What are you waiting for? I would appreciate that very much. But anyway, that's me for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.